Well, welcome friends, and thank you for joining me for a very special event. I hope you're enjoying the Cosmopolitans and New York cheese pizza to get you in the mood. We also have pumpkin pie coming out following tonight's presentation, so something to look forward to. Now, as many of you know, my name is Destry Puia, and normally I'm the General Manager for the Arts Centre. But tonight I will be your tour guide as I share with you some of the recent adventures I had on a study mission to America earlier this year. So make sure you have your cosmopolitans at the ready as we prepare to embark on an arts adventure through America. But firstly, I would like to acknowledge a few people. Jock McElwain, our Diamond benefactor. Welcome, sir. Always a pleasure to see you. And I'd also like to acknowledge the board of the Arts Centre, and in particular the chairman, Kerry Watson, and his fellow board members gathered here this evening. Without their generous support, I wouldn't have been going, so thank you, Mr. Chairman. And also to acknowledge Tim Cole and his fellow board members. Always a pleasure to see the friends of the Arts Centre. Thank you, Tim. I'd also like to acknowledge the City of Gold Coast for their continued support of the Arts Centre, and in particular the attendance tonight of Councillors William Owen Jones and Councillors Chris Robbins. Thank you for coming along tonight. And to pass on the apologies of Mayor Tom Tate, who wishes he could be here but is otherwise engaged. I would also like to acknowledge the Australian Performing Arts Centres Association, and in particular the Executive Director, Rick Heath, who was instrumental in pulling together this first initiative for the performing arts. So thank you to APACA and thank you to Rick Heath for all your efforts, not only leading into the trip but also while we were on the trip. So thank you. I'd also like to acknowledge my fellow arts adventurers, Joel McGuinness from Bunbury Regional Entertainment Centre, Kirsty Allen from Artistic Merit, who along with Rick Heath had to put up with me for the better part of 3 weeks, and as Poppy would attest, that's no easy feat. So thank you, fellow travellers. Now tonight we're doing a bit of a first because we're simulcasting this event live over the airways, and already we have people joining us from every state of Australia, as well as a large contingent from New Zealand who I believe are all my relatives. So to everyone across Australia, g'day. And to all the relatives back home, kia ora whānau, thanks for tuning in. Now, before we start our journey, in the age-old tradition of not missing a sales opportunity, I would like to sell you something. They're playing our song. They're playing our song stars real-life couple Scott Irwin and Danielle Barnes, fittingly set in New York. This story tells the tale of a wisecracking composer who finds a new offbeat lyricist, and a whirlwind professional and romantic relationship begins. When it comes to making music, they are a match made in heaven. But is this a relationship doomed, or will love hit the right note? They're Playing Our Song was written by Tony and Pulitzer Prize-winning author of The Odd Couple and Sweet Charity, Noel Simon, and is playing for 2 nights only, Friday 26th and Saturday 27th of April. So log on to the website or call 5588 4000. Okay, promo over. So tonight I'll be walking you through the itinerary of our adventures that we had over in America, and sharing with you some of the common themes that came about as a result of my attendance over in America, and looking at some key learnings that I was able to take on board in regards to the development of the Arts Centre, and there'll be an opportunity for some questions at the end of tonight's presentation. So the intent of the study mission was to learn from America and study their practice in regards to performing arts, and look at what best practice learnings we could apply here in America, and also, I guess, affirmation of some of the things that we believed we were doing right. So to put those up, to challenge those assumptions, and to also build new international relationships with American counterparts. To achieve that, the itinerary was broken up in 2 parts. There was a New York leg, and during that time I was able to conduct various venue tours and our itinerary around New York centered at attendance at 2 international conferences, which I'll talk about shortly. Following the New York leg, we then went on a cross-country trip through America and visited places such as Portland, Oregon, San Francisco, and LA, and met with different organizations, which I'll talk about shortly as well. So as you can see from those massive logos up there, during the venue tour portion, I was able to go and see some of the world's leading arts organizations and cultural facilities, including the Guggenheim, Lincoln Center, the Met Opera, a lot of Broadway facilities, and the Metropolitan Museum. Following that, we went straight into the attendance at 2 key conferences. The first was the APAC Conference, which stands for the Association of Performing Arts Presenters. It takes place every year in New York in January, over 14 days, and it's the largest event of its kind, attracting more than 3,500 delegates from across the world. The objective of the conference is twofold. Firstly, to allow for the exchanging of ideas around the performing arts, and secondly, the opportunity to broker partnerships and conduct performing arts business. The event includes main plenary sessions, an expo hall featuring over 350 different artists, managers, producers, vendors, and in addition to that, there's over 1,000 showcases that take place during the conference, ranging from very small intimate performances in meeting rooms through to large-scale concerts in Carnegie Hall. There was also an awards lunch and other special events that took place around that time, as well as different pre-conference forums. The theme of this year's conference was Imagine, and program highlights included entrepreneurship, innovation and presenting, where speakers explored successful ways in which artists are collaborating and partnering with other sectors and presenting and of the presenting field to achieve success. Breaking boundaries through meaningful engagement, which looked at ways to reach people from different socio-economic backgrounds by matching performing artists to schools and also educational centres to housing communities. We also looked at new patterns of arts participation, which was presented by the great Alan Brown, who wanted performing arts managers to radically reconceptualise the relationship between our programs and our spaces in order to reach younger and more diverse audiences. From the mass full throttle and what appeared at time a slightly chaotic intensity of APAP, we moved straight into a more serene and timely paced conference, which was the ISPA Congress. ISPA stands for the International Society for the Performing Arts, and they hold 2 conferences each year. The first in New York in January, and the second is held internationally with past locations including South Korea, London, Brazil, and I believe Australia in 2014. Other than the pace of the conference, there were several differences between this conference and the APAP conference. Firstly, the size. This conference attracts around 350 to 500 delegates each year, whereas APAP had around 3,500. The position of delegates. ISPA tended to have more of the organisation's CEOs and not necessarily the programming and marketing staff in attendance. The purpose. Whereas APAP is a full-blown performing arts market with a conference bolted on, ISPA was very much about the conference with minimal marketing activity taking place. Themes explored throughout this conference included reinventing the wheel, artistic invention, how do we balance artistic innovation with competing demands of other stakeholders. We heard from a variety of speakers, including Soleil Al-Bassam from Sabab Theatre in Kuwait. We also heard from Diane, American Repertory Theatre, and our very own Kate Champion from Force Majeure, who did Australian companies proud during the conference. Models of innovation was another topic which explored management strategies and approaches designed to address the new and old challenges. We heard from Maestro Armin Dianenda, who was from the Kinshasa Symphony Orchestra in the Congo, and we heard the story about how he was transforming the life and the quality of his community through music and putting instruments in people's arms. And it's the only symphony in Central Africa. So if you get the chance to Google Kinshasa Symphony Orchestra, please do so. It's a wonderful, wonderful read. Diane Quinn from Cirque du Soleil, who was the marketing and development manager, and we heard how Cirque du Soleil were struggling to attract younger audiences. Now that came as sweet news for myself, and I'm sure many other theatre managers, where we struggle to attract younger audiences. So to know that in that ambition we're not alone and we're in good company with Cirque du Soleil, it was very refreshing to hear. We also heard from George Steele from the New York City Opera, and he talked about how the tough economic times over in America had forced his organisation to make a decision between selling the venue that they had owned, I think, for over the better part of 100 years to maintain the operations of the organisation or to maintain the status quo. They decided to sell their theatre, which, as you could appreciate, was a very controversial move, but in doing so, he saved his organisation, and indeed they're flourishing today when many leading opera companies in America and orchestras have fallen by the wayside. We also heard from the General Manager of New York's Metropolitan Opera, Peter Galb, who talked about providing innovation to a structure that is typically stagnant, being opera companies. Peter Galb has initiated a program of commissioning new operas. He's offered dress rehearsals free of charge to the public. He's created an immensely popular $20 rush ticket for last standby tickets, which I bought. And also he's provided live transmissions to opening night performances on giant screens in Times Square. What many of you may be familiar with is that he's also broadcasting the Met live in HD, and that has had a tremendous impact to the organisation, not just in regards to the profile, but the revenue returns for the organisation. Just to put it in perspective, each year, annually, in person, they have around 800,000 ticket buyers. Via the Met live in HD, there is over 3 million annual ticket buyers. So that just shows you the impact that them embracing new technology is having on not only increasing awareness about what they do and improving the revenue position of what they do, but the profile and developing new audiences for opera. Following the attendance at the conference and the venue tours, we then set on our mission travelling across America. And I've just got some of the companies that we met with during this time, and the purpose of these meetings was to take a more in-depth opportunity to meet one-on-one with the CEOs, programming managers and marketing managers of some of the key organisations. So we met with Portland Centre Stage, Yerba, Buena, Contemporary Arts, the Music Centre in LA, and from that mass of meetings we were able to take away key learnings, of which I'll touch upon a couple this evening. So one of the key themes to emerge from those meetings and the conferences were, it got me thinking about cultural spaces and the different types of cultural spaces and the different types of ways that people are programming within those spaces. So I heard a lot about audience-focused spaces. Now, this traditionally is those spaces that were set up with the primary objective of getting the audience in its seat to view the artwork and to take in the performance. So very little consideration was given to what happened outside of that environment. So the main intent, whether it was in the primary or secondary performance spaces, was really about gathering an audience and putting them in front of the product. But we also saw community-focused spaces, and this was a change in mood where organisations were equally focused on what was taking place outside of that formalised audience-artist interaction. And I've got a couple of case studies which I'll talk about shortly. And we also saw venues that were being developed that were looking to be more lifestyle-driven. And it was about making the art spaces sit along non-art spaces. So examples of this that I heard was in São Paulo, Brazil, where a new cultural precinct there also includes supermarkets, gyms, and apartments. And the ideology behind this is that the arts are a part of everyday life. So any facilities or organisations involved in the arts should not be treated exclusively from the development of future communities. And a lot closer to home, we just need to look at South Bank and how the difference that the parklands there has made to the families and section of the community engaging with our main cultural precinct here in Brisbane. Another key trend to emerge was in the programming areas and how we were positioning the product. Now, if you look at a lot of seasons across different theatres, a lot of the product tends to be the same because we're reliant on that shared collegiate spirit to tour works around the country, whether it's in Australia or America. However, companies were starting to approach this differently. So to illustrate, our typical season for a lot of companies is developed and sold on a genre-specific basis. So whether we've got a comedy package together, whether we've got a drama season or a musical theatre season, and then we go about selling that season based upon that genre. So we may present an offering of different musical theatre packages. From discussions with different programming staff and hearing keynote presentations as well, there was a move to more lifestyle programming, so forgetting genres and focusing on the commonalities across genres and using that to develop future audiences. And I'll use a case study to illustrate. In Austin, Texas, at Austin Theatre in Austin, Texas, we heard about their transformation, that they'd moved from a genre-based season to a lifestyle-based season. So they started thinking about their community, how their community engaged, the lifestyle of their audience and their future audience, and trying to deliver packages accordingly. So, for example, they repackaged their offerings to reflect the nature of their community. The Progressive Pack. This was all the adventurous works, largely from unknown companies, and that was designed for a younger audience who wanted to be more ambitious in their artistic offerings and ventures. The Big Gay Night Out included things such as Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, comedian Kathy Griffith, and drama about sexuality. Now, that typically would have been offered in a comedy package or a musical theatre package. So again, examples of how their program and marketing staff were trying to align things to the lifestyle of that particular community. The Leading Lady series, which targeted older women and featured safe and popular works in genres such as ballet, opera, and also featured drama by known women in leading roles. The Marquee series, which only featured headliners, and the catalyst to make it into the season is that you should have been able to tell Joe Public about an artist in that season, and there should have been some level of recognition. If there wasn't, you didn't make the grade. They also moved away from the term of using education series and started calling their shows family shows. Now, there's many theatres in Australia who do all of the above, but for Austin Theatre, the key outcome that they took away by realigning what they traditionally do was that in 2 years they doubled their subscriber numbers from 2,000 annually to 4,000. And this is in the context of a climate that was incredibly financially challenging for our counterparts in America. There were also trends on community engagement, and through our discussions we were able to take away some examples of how people were tackling the issue of community engagement. And it was a timely discussion because what we're seeing here as part of the national cultural policy, as part of our state arts agenda and locally as well, is that there's a need to not simply put product on the stage and keep tuning that through, but how can we make the engagement longer and more meaningful? And a lot of the funding will eventually start to reflect and create opportunities to deliver that. So there'll be financial support, I'm confident, to achieve that, but it still places presenters with the challenge of what exactly do we mean by community engagement. So just to illustrate two examples of how two very different venues were tackling that over in America, the first one I'll use is Yerba Buena Center for the Arts in San Francisco. Now, the model they were using was around audience development. So their community engagement was all about growing future audiences. Now, to the untrained eye, it looked like they were throwing fantastic wild parties every second week, and everyone was coming along to attend, but there was a deeper strategic purpose in mind. San Francisco has a high gay, lesbian and transgender community, and the Arts Centre really wanted that section of the community to play a part in the life of the organisation. So what they started to do was program parties and events that were free of charge. Some of them were outdoors, some of them were indoors, and also using key influences from that sector of the community to help organise and present that work. What they saw over a period of time is that free participation was translating into paid ticket attendance on an annual basis. So the opportunity to engage with all these free events, their objective was to show some sort of migration to paid ticketing attendance, and indeed that was the case. Another example of community engagement was the Music Centre in LA, who were really focused on community development. So the image you've got before you shows the Arts Plaza, which sits just outside the Music Centre and down the road from the Walt Disney Concert Hall, which many of you would recognise. Now, the council there had built this fantastic new arts park that really wasn't being activated or accessed by a great number of people, so they partnered with the Music Centre to really start activating that space and getting the community involved. Now, unlike Yerba, Buena, where the outcome was a migration to paid ticket attendance, the measure of success for the Music Centre wasn't about that paid ticket attendance. It was all about the difference they were making to the community, how many people were getting involved, how many people were coming down and having discussions about anything you could possibly imagine. Was it dance classes? Was it just coming down to exercise, or was it participating in festivals and events? The measure of success for them was the hours that people were getting together and the quality of that engagement. If that happened to translate into paid attendance inside the very formalised and structured venues, fantastic, but that wasn't their main driver in delivering their programs. So we got to hear a lot about the impact those types of free programs were making, not necessarily to the organisation's bottom line, but to the development of their community. Philanthropy. As we know, America are the leading force when it comes to philanthropy. They have a long tradition of not only using philanthropy to build many of the amazing facilities that they have, but equally to fund the annual operations of many of the organisations. So again, we were very fortunate to have the opportunity to sit with the CEOs and try to get a better understanding in real terms of how their philanthropy was structured and the priorities that they were putting it towards. Now, to use the Arts Centre as one typical example, when we look at the income, our income falls into three categories: earned income, which is around 65%, government income, which is around 30%, and philanthropy, which is being generous at 5%. And that's probably fairly indicative of a lot of arts organisations here in Australia. America, on the other hand, have quite different statistics. Philanthropy, their annual targets were around 30%. Government only contributed 10%, and from that, 1.5 came from federal, 1.5 came from state, and if you were lucky, the remaining 7% came from local government sources, and 60% came from earned revenue. Now, one of the key learnings from meeting with the companies following what have been some very dire economic circumstances in America is that we heard, what I took away from that experience, that there was an incredibly large amount of resilience within those organisations. We've all read the headlines and we've seen doomsday predictions about and realities of companies that have fallen by the wayside due to a lack of funding from a variety of sources. But equally, I was impressed by the resilience of those organisations who were still out there in America, still doing business. And the way that many of them were able to achieve that is the high net worth individuals who were the main philanthropic sources of their organisation had largely been sheltered from some of the worst turmoil that was taking place over the last couple of years. As a result of that, the philanthropic targets were, to some degree, being able to be maintained during those last couple of years. So the resilience, I thought, was absolutely amazing. their priorities for philanthropy differ to ours as well. For example, we stream our philanthropic income to programs, whether that's youth development or artist development, and we also put it into acquisition of artworks. There's also endowment funds and the objective to grow endowment fund sources, and from time to time, depending on the aspirations of the organisation, there are capital improvements that need to be made, or indeed new facilities that need to be built, and philanthropic income plays a part, not a great part, but a part in those endeavours. America is very similar. They have the same priorities, but one of the things that I took away is above that, there was another degree of sophistication in regards to how they were using their philanthropic sources. So I heard from a lot of companies that their priorities with their philanthropic income was about debt reduction, whether that was debt reduction, debt inherited through previous administration, whether it was debt as a result of taking a risk on a show that didn't quite pan out, but the intent was those funds were purposely being used to manage that debt and to reduce that debt. Equally, I also heard about the organisations that were building up funds to use as working capital for the annual operations of the organisation. Now, those are two concepts, at least here at the Arts Centre, we haven't explored at all. And I don't think we would be unique in that undertaking here in Australia. So a high level of sophistication with their philanthropic income. So, some of the key learnings taken away from this. It's about a space, not place. Now, to be absolutely honest, a theatre is a theatre is a theatre. And you can sit in a theatre in a regional community and have a fantastic experience between the audience and the artist, or you could sit in the capital city and have the exact same quality of experience, that intimacy between the audience and the artist. However, the difference that I took away from a lot of the organisations who were wanting to take a much greater lead in the development of their community was how they were activating their spaces and the difference that they were wanting to do outside of the traditional performing arts infrastructure. Also, people power. Again, along similar lines, there were organisations who were wanting to play a much greater role in the development of their community. So it wasn't just about ticket sales, it wasn't just about revenue returns for the year, but indeed it was about the contribution they were making to the life of their community and how they were improving the quality of the life of the town, city or region that they lived in. And dollars make sense. I think we all took away key learnings about the resilience of the arts organisations in America and the difference that philanthropic income was making to the long-term sustainability of the various arts organisations in America. Here in Australia, we have a long way to go in regards to building that relationship with donors and benefactors and making that represent a much larger portion of our annual income. What we're seeing at a local, state and national level are retractions in the availability of funding for different purposes. So that then presents two options for ourselves as presenters of art. The options are we decrease our artistic aspirations and ambitions, which I personally don't want to do, or we find new ways to fund those aspirations. And again, philanthropic sources using the American model is something I think we could develop greatly. And that is it. So thank you, everyone. Now, we do have a microphone here, so I'd like to open the floor for any questions, and we'll get you to speak into the microphone just for the purposes of recording and archiving the footage from tonight. Any questions?
What fabulous buildings did you see?
Well,
I don't think I need to do it. What fabulous buildings did you see?
Wow. The Walt Disney Concert Hall is obviously a standout. As a piece of architecture, it is just, it's amazing. It is so impressive. But equally, there's a challenge with signature pieces of infrastructure. And we heard from the Music Centre that that particular venue was incredibly popular, and like the Opera House, there were a lot of tourists and residents that went to that facility to have their picture outside, but translating that engagement into opening up the doors, exploring the venue, actually participating as an audience member and being part of the living and breathing fabric of that building was a challenge. So that building impressiveness, that was top of the list, but equally it was a bit of a double-edged sword in regards to making sure that the level of design and aesthetic doesn't become a barrier for those, because it does have a bit of an intimidating aspect as well. So getting the mix right, in addition to the programming choices being made, I think are critical. Yes, I'm going over here.
Destry, when you was in LA and you went to that new centre that just been opened up, what was the purpose of attracting the people to come there? People from all walks of life. Was that to generate their interest in art, or was it to quell the riots and whatever? Please explain.
I think it was simply to improve the livability and the quality of life within the city. Like when we met with the staff from the music centre, they were very genuine about the fact that they weren't trying to drive revenue. It wasn't necessarily about the annual statistics coming through the place, but there was a lot of heart in what they were trying to do, which honestly was about making opportunities from people from as broad a background as possible to get together, to celebrate, to engage, whatever words we want to put around it. There was a real genuine intent for that to take place, with the ultimate outcome being, I think, an increased satisfaction in being a member of that community or a visitor to that area. Stephen Wolf, a consultant based in America, talks about community entanglement and organisations, particularly performing arts centres, becoming entangled with our community. So this was a great example of how that was being achieved by one particular organisation. So I do think it was about the quality of life and contributing to that. Yes, down the back.
Hi, Destry. I was just wondering, on the trip, did anything, a particular idea or innovation stay with you that you particularly want to try here on the Gold Coast?
Well, that was the challenge. There were so many that stuck with me. But yes, I think for the most part it was probably affirmation, because we here as an organisation have been thinking a long time about the difference we make to our community. And what's brought a lot of those discussions forward and given it extra prominence is the development of the cultural precinct that we're seeing at the moment. And again, coming back to a theatre as a theatre, if we really are going to make a difference, not just regionally but nationally, I think we need to think about the role we play, the relevance that we have within the community, and the unique artistic voice we want to contribute to both the state and the national landscape. So for me, I guess it was more about affirmation of heading in that direction and seeing the tangible evidence of organisations who had gone down that path, but equally organisations who had not gone down the path, and some of the issues that they had were experiencing in regards to proving their relevance within their community.
And Destry, you spoke of the difficulty of getting the younger audience engaged. Is there an age bracket at which people do begin to become engaged?
I'm not sure, to be absolutely honest. I know from, if I just relate it back to our experience here and what we're trying to do at the Arts Centre, we believe that engagement at the earliest age possible leads to lifelong participation in the arts. So with that thought in mind, we've been targeting mums with young kids to come along and interactive storytelling, our family season, and trying to work closely with the schools. I'm not sure of a definitive tipping point to say, okay, now you're at a certain age. And I'm not sure it would be as clear as that as well. And I also think that there's a significant amount of variables within different communities. But the best way I can answer is looking at our own experience and our own strategies and following the philosophy of that early engagement leading to lifelong participation in the arts, and trying to attract that younger audience Cheryl, who was the previous programming manager, her claim to fame was that we now offer something from birth to death. So that's quite a broad demographic. We couldn't fit that on a postcard, and I don't think it would be particularly handy. But again, following that mentality of trying to get people in as young as we possibly can and get them hooked on the arts.
Destry.
Mr.
Working.
McElwain.
When I was in America, I noticed that the philanthropic giving was normally associated with a naming right to some room or venue or theatre. Or did you find that also? And don't we need to have something of substance to be able to see and to attach perhaps prices to within a cultural precinct so that philanthropy can survive and thrive?
Yes, I think the philanthropy discussion is twofold. We have the capital investment opportunities and models, and also the annual organisational operations and supporting that. So coming back to your point about the capital development, my word, everything and possibly that you could think of in the theatres in America have a name slapped on them, whether it's a hallway, a small foyer space, an exit out the side, through to the large performance spaces. That will need to be an opportunity as part of our cultural precinct discussions, so that the funding of it obviously doesn't all come from the government purse. So there's going to need to be a variety of financial income streams to support the development. But as you say, Jock, the enticement needs to be of a high enough quality standard that the sell isn't too much of a task. On the annual operations side, a lot of the organisations that we met with, when we talked about the size of their board, they were, I think the smallest I heard was around 15 or 20, and that's a small scale. And one organisation had over 200 board members. But they're not board members as we here in Australia think. They're not about the strategic direction of the organisation or the governance obligations of the company. It was all about the networks and the give or get type of model, where there was a minimum buy-in as a director on a board, and there was equally an expectation that you would bring certain people to the fold. Now, they're unashamed about that structure and how their organisations run. So that was quite a unique lesson to take away. In applying that to Australian market, I'm not sure if that'd be quite a significant leap forward in applying that sort of mentality to how we structure our boards and grow our boards. But equally, there's probably some middle ground there that I think we could take away in moving towards more annual operational income coming from philanthropic sources. And down the back.
Destry, just two things. Firstly, in the new cultural precinct, we've got a beautiful building which we're going to call the Jock. So quite happy to talk to you in a moment, Jock.
That's on the record, digital record, Jock.
And the second thing, when you were over there, the Gold Coast is a regional city, 500,000 people. Were you thinking about how our size translated into some of those larger communities that you visited?
Yes, and I'd probably go back to the New York experience, because one of the challenges we have is that we're a very large regional city, to the point where, when we're a metropolitan city, depending on what definition you want to use. But equally, we sit down the road within arm's length of the capital city of our state, which has some amazing facilities, some amazing programs, and amazing staff running those facilities as well. So as we grow not only this organisation, but the infrastructure for the future, how can we provide a distinct and artistic voice as a region to the state and to the country? And one of the learnings I took away was the Brooklyn Academy of Music, or BAM as it's more popularly known. In New York, there is an absolute cacophony of arts organisations and facilities, and top of the tree, you would have to say, is Broadway and what takes place there. Now, that's a certain type of activity. But BAM has found its unique voice in that very crowded landscape, and theirs is all about adventurous work, about their engagement with their community, about thinking outside of the square, the movies they provide. You can't get that anywhere else. The artists that they bring, if BAM didn't exist, they probably wouldn't be there, and they have now become one of the world leaders in the type of direction that they're heading in. So looking at that organisation, its geographical location, and its need to determine its own distinctive arts voice, I think there's some learnings that we could take away with our future development. Yes.
Hi, Destry. Thank you. I had a multi-layered question. The first part you've answered already a little bit about the structure of arts boards in America, because I had previously read a little bit about, particularly in New York, the prestigious arts organisations boards attract people where it's considered very prestigious to be a part of that organisation. It's a great honour and privilege. And secondly, that those board members are tasked with not just, like you said, the governance and so on, but bringing more money into that organisation through philanthropic networking and so on. So you already answered that a little bit, because I was going to ask you how we might bring that here a bit more. But the second layer of my question in those conversations that you had over there about philanthropy is both Australians and Americans, generally speaking, are very generous people and very supportive of community life and so on. But here we seem to be backwards in coming forwards in some ways, whereas the Americans can be often very enthusiastic and confident and maybe a little less afraid to make those sorts of approaches to people. So my question is, are there some really practical things that you learned from those conversations about how we can better make those approaches to sponsors and supporters who are already generous people, but maybe we haven't quite connected with them in the way that we could?
Well, there's an interesting quote, who I can't remember who said it, but it is an Australian, and someone in the Twitter sphere could hopefully notate this quote. But the point was that Australian doesn't have a history. It's not that we have a history of not giving, we have a history of not asking. And that's quite a fundamental mind shift that needs to take place within Australia, in particular arts organisations. We have companies here in Australia who are doing absolutely fantastic in regards to philanthropy, but they tend to be the exception as opposed to the norm, which is the case in America. Looking at it from an operational perspective, the ask for the most part lay, and I'm not passing the responsibility to the board, but it lay with that particular board of the organisation. They were the connections to the business community, they were the connection to the high net worth individuals, they were the connections to people who had an interest in the arts and money as well. And so bridging that gap between the organisation and the arts workers essentially working in that organisation versus the broader economic opportunities that are out there via philanthropic individuals was largely being met by those boards and those expanded boards. So if we are to, I'm not suggesting we copy it, word for word from what America's doing, because I think that's a significant transition forward, but there has to be some learnings in there somewhere about how we structure organisations and the role they play in obtaining philanthropic sources. I guess the challenge is that a lot of, from Performing Arts Centre world, a lot of those organisations are run as local government structures who don't qualify for deductible gift recipient status. So the practicalities the legal practicalities from a taxation point of view is something I think needs to be addressed. Otherwise, the opportunity for philanthropic funds to come in will never be realised. Sorry, I hope that answered it. I think we've got time for one more question.
I just wanted to know, did you find there are other complexes that had the performing arts and the visual arts together, like we have here, or do you think they should be separated, standalone ventures?
I'll answer the question twofold. There were lots of organisations who had not only the performing arts and visual arts, but also a cinema-type program, whereas here in Australia, the Arts Centre, we're incredibly unique. But the best example, again, was BAM in Brooklyn, where they have a very strong annual cinema attendance. The performing arts is what they do with gallery operations happening to the side. So there are models out there. Having said that, looking at our own aspirations for the cultural precinct, I think it's safe to say that one of the things that we really need to improve is not only the prominence of our visual arts community and what we do here within the gallery, but also the opportunities to increase donations coming to and building up our own collection and supporting and presenting as much work as we possibly can. So as part of the brief, the gallery has been proposed as being a standalone facility to help build that prominence. And I often make the comparison that if you look just up the road at QPAC and Quagoma, they're both incredibly exciting organisations, but they're separate organisations. And could they achieve what they've achieved if they were merged into one? I'm not sure. I think it'd be quite difficult. Having said that, there are examples where under one umbrella organisations are able to flourish and grow. So I think in the first instance, with our own planning for our region, if we can get the cultural precinct bricks and mortar aspects right, the next discussion about how those are best run, not only from an artistic and strategic point of view, but an efficiency point of view, then becomes the priority. So there are examples of working really well separate, but also there are a number of examples where collectively there's lots of benefit to be gained. Well, that concludes tonight's presentation. I think I can smell pumpkin pie on its way. So thank you one and all for your attendance. Thank you to our online audience for tuning in tonight. And I look forward to seeing you all at a performance here at the Arts Centre Gold Coast in the near future. Thank you.